one could tame the alpha vampire's giant horse until the gentle servant touched its head. Its towers pierced the moonlit sky, and its walls were black as obsidian, glistening with the wet sheen of a storm that had passed hours ago. A cold wind whispered through the battlements, carrying the scent of salt and earth from the cliffs below. Few dared approach this fortress, for it was said to be the home of Valric, the alpha vampire, a being of fearsome power, immortal and cruel. Yet despite the legends, the castle held secrets few knew, one of them being a creature of terrifying beauty and strength. A giant black horse, untamable, said to mirror the darkness of its master. Elira adjusted the coarse cloak around her shoulders as she stepped through the castle gates. She had served in many houses before, but none as strange as this one. The villagers spoke of Valric with trembling voices, calling him merciless, cruel, and unapproachable. But Elira had never been one to fear blindly. Her father had always told her, fear is the mind's trap, courage is understanding it and walking forward anyway. And so, despite the stories, she walked into the unknown. The stable doors creaked as Elira pushed them open, revealing the enormous shape of the horse inside. It was even larger than the tales had said, with muscles like coiled steel and eyes that gleamed like molten silver in the dim lantern light. Its hooves made no sound, yet the floor trembled slightly as it shifted its weight. The horse's mane fell like a shadowed waterfall, brushing the ground in waves of midnight black. All the servants avoided this stable, claiming the horse was dangerous. Some said it would strike anyone who dared come near. Others whispered that it carried the very essence of the alpha vampire's soul, and that to touch it was to invite either death or madness. Elira, however, felt only curiosity. Her heart pounded, but it was not fear, it was wonder. "You there?" a voice called from the shadows. Elira turned sharply. Valric stepped into the doorway, his presence filling the room like a living shadow. He was tall, with skin pale as moonlight and eyes that seemed to pierce through every secret thought. His black hair fell across his shoulders, framing a face that was both beautiful and dangerous. Elira's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. "This is the stable," Valric said, his voice low and commanding. "Do you know what creature dwells here?" "I have heard the tales," Elira replied honestly, "but I do not fear what I do not understand." Valric studied her for a long moment as if weighing her very soul. Few dared speak to him with such honesty. A flicker of amusement or perhaps approval crossed his sharp features. "Most fear and flee," he said. "Yet here you stand. Tell me, servant, what do you see when you look at this creature?" Elira swallowed and stepped closer, her eyes never leaving the horse. "I see loneliness," she said softly. "I see a creature waiting for someone who understands it, and I think I can try to help it." Valric's lips curved into the barest shadow of a smile, and the air between them grew charged with something neither fear nor anger could name. He turned and gestured toward the horse. "Then prove it. But do not think this will be simple. Many have tried and failed." "Some never returned," Elira nodded. Her hands trembled, but she moved forward slowly, keeping her voice steady. "I will not hurt it, I only want to understand." The horse snorted, a cloud of misty breath rising from its nostrils, and fixed her with a gaze so sharp that it could have cut steel. Elira stopped, kneeling slightly, holding out a trembling hand. The creature shifted, its great head moving closer, nostrils flaring as it studied her. Time seemed to stretch, the shadows of the stable curling around them, holding its breath. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours, and Elira remained calm. Slowly, she reached forward and let her palm brush the horse's massive forehead. A deep, resonant shiver ran through its body, and for the first time in anyone's memory, the giant horse lowered its head in submission, kneeling slightly before her. Elira gasped quietly, not in fear but in awe. From the corner of her eye she saw Valric's expression change. He had approached silently, but now he stopped, frozen, watching as the impossible happened. His horse, untamable, wild, the living shadow of his own dark soul, bowed to a servant. A flicker of emotions crossed his face: surprise, disbelief, perhaps even something like admiration. "Impossible," he whispered, though not to Elira. She did not need him to speak. She could feel the weight of his presence, the mixture of pride and unease. She continued to stroke the horse's head, feeling warmth and understanding flow from it, a connection neither human nor beast had ever felt. The horse nudged her hand gently, a gesture that spoke more than words could. Elira looked into its silver eyes and whispered softly, "You are not alone anymore. I am here." Valric stepped closer, his long shadow stretching across the stable floor. "You should not be here," he said, though his voice lacked its usual sharpness. "Do you understand what this means? You have touched what no one has touched before." "I do," Elira replied simply, her gaze never leaving the horse, "and I do not regret it." Valric's expression hardened, yet there was a vulnerability there, buried beneath centuries of pride and solitude. He knew the bond forming before him was dangerous, not to Elira, but to himself. For centuries he had been alone, ruling his castle and his powers without companionship. And now, a mere mortal, gentle and fearless, had done what no one else could: reach his heart through the creature that mirrored him. The horse moved closer to Elira, pressing its great forehead against her hands. A low, rumbling sound came from deep within its chest, like thunder rolling across the cliffs. Elira's eyes widened as she felt the energy emanating from it. She sensed not just strength but a history, a depth of emotion shaped by centuries of shadow. You have awakened something," Valric said slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Something I thought was buried forever." Elira looked up at him, sensing the complexity of his emotions. There was danger here, yes, but also longing. A longing he would never speak aloud. Before either of them could speak again, a distant howl echoed from the cliffs outside. The wind picked up, carrying with it whispers of old curses and long-forgotten spirits. The horse shivered, ears flat against its head, but it did not flee. It remained beside Elira, as if pledging its loyalty to her gentle courage. Valric's jaw tightened. "You do not know what you are touching. This creature is not a mere horse. It is the guardian of my power, my curse, my solitude. By reaching it, you have reached me." Elira did not flinch. "Then perhaps it is time someone did." Her voice was quiet but firm, filled with compassion that no fear could overshadow. For a long moment, Valric said nothing. The stable was silent except for the low rumble of the horse and the sound of wind moaning through cracks in the walls. Then, without a word, he turned and left, the heavy door creaking shut behind him. Elira remained with the horse, sensing that something monumental had begun. As the moonlight streamed through the high windows, Elira pressed her forehead to the horse's, closing her eyes. She could feel a pulse, not just of life, but of centuries of loneliness and sorrow interwoven with strength and pride. She whispered softly, "I will not leave you, neither of you." The horse lowered itself fully to the ground, a deep exhalation shaking its massive body. Elira held onto its mane, feeling an energy she had never encountered before. Somewhere deep in the shadows, Valric watched, struggling with the storm of emotions Elira had awakened. For the first time in hundreds of years, he felt vulnerable. And for the first time in hundreds of years, he realized that he wanted someone not to fear him, but to see him, truly see him. Outside, the storm clouds shifted, revealing the moon in full. Its light glinted against the horse's coat, turning it into a living shadow that seemed to breathe with life and memory. Elira took a deep breath, her heart pounding, knowing that her life had changed forever. She had touched not only the untamable horse but also something deeper, something ancient, something that could either bring redemption or chaos. And as she held the massive creature, the shadows in the corners of the stable stirred. There was a presence, old and watchful, sensing that a new bond had been formed. The night seemed to hold its breath, as if the world itself waited to see what would come next. Then a sudden, sharp noise echoed from the upper castle corridors, footsteps, deliberate and slow. Elira froze, her hand still on the horse's head. The door to the stable rattled as if pushed by some unseen force. She looked up, and in the shadowed doorway a figure stepped forward, cloaked in darkness, eyes gleaming with intent she could not yet understand. Elira felt a chill run down her spine, but she did not move. She knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever came next would change everything. The giant horse whinnied softly, pressing closer to her. Elira held on tighter. And in that moment, she realized that she was no longer just a servant in the castle of shadows. She had become part of a story older than time, one of power, loneliness, and the fragile possibility of redemption, a story that had only just begun. The castle's corridors echoed with the soft clatter of Valric's boots as he strode through the darkened halls. His mind was restless, troubled by the sight he had witnessed in the stable the night before. A servant, a human, a mere mortal, had touched his horse, the untamable creature that had never bowed to anyone in all his long years. The realization burned like fire against the cold walls of his heart. He had expected fear, trembling, or even foolish defiance. Instead, he had seen calm, compassion, and courage. Elira's small hands had pressed against the horse's massive head, and the creature had knelt. Not in submission, as one would kneel to a master, but in recognition, a quiet surrender that spoke of trust. That trust was not for him, it was for her. The thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He had ruled these lands, this castle and its creatures, for centuries. He had been the master of darkness and light, feared by the living and the dead alike. Yet, in one gentle touch, she had shifted something deep within him, a crack in the armor he had long considered unbreakable. Meanwhile, Elira remained in the stable, kneeling beside the horse. Its massive body pressed against her, a warmth she did not expect flowing through the enormous creature. The bond she felt was strange, almost magical, as if the horse's mind and heart whispered to her own. She had grown up with animals, but nothing like this. She could sense the horse's history: loneliness, fear, and centuries of obedience to a master who himself was imprisoned in darkness. She leaned closer and murmured, "It's okay, you're safe with me." The horse exhaled slowly, a sound like distant thunder, and lowered its head further, allowing her fingers to trace along its sleek black mane. A sudden noise from the castle corridors made Elira's heart leap. She froze. Footsteps, deliberate, slow, and measured, echoed through the stable door. The shadows seemed to twist around the edges, elongating in the flickering lantern light. She held her breath, unsure whether to call out or retreat. Then Valric stepped inside. His gaze swept over the horse and then over her. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension between them was tangible, almost suffocating. Valric's eyes, dark and sharp, seemed to probe her very soul. Elira's heart pounded, but she did not flinch. "You have grown bold," Valric said finally, his voice low and steady, carrying a hint of curiosity beneath the authority. "Do you know what you are doing?" Elira looked up at him. "I think I understand enough. I do not wish to harm him. I only want to help." Valric studied her closely. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the courage in her small frame. But he also saw the danger. A bond like this was not something trivial. The horse carried more than muscle and speed. It carried a fragment of his soul, a reflection of his curse and power. To touch it, to form a connection, was to touch him. He stepped closer, the shadows bending around his tall form. "It is not just the horse. You have touched me." "Do you know what that means?" Elira's gaze did not waver. "I do not fully understand," she admitted, "but I feel something, and I think it can be good." Valric's expression darkened. He wanted to say no, to protect himself, to reclaim the distance he had maintained for centuries. But another part of him, one long buried beneath pride and solitude, stirred. He had not realized how hollow his existence had become until he saw her with the horse. There was something pure in her courage, something he had thought lost to time. Before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from the castle entrance. The horse's ears flicked back, and it snorted, muscles tensing like coiled springs. Elira and Valric both turned toward the sound. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked and hooded. Valric stiffened instantly. He recognized the presence, one of the rival vampire lords, a creature who had long sought to challenge his dominance. A sneer curled over the rival's lips. "So, this is the famous alpha vampire," the figure said, voice dripping with mockery. "I hear your prized beast has finally met someone foolish enough to touch it. How touching." Valric's hand moved instinctively toward the hilt at his side, but he did not draw it. He did not fear this rival, not truly. But the presence of Elira and the horse complicated matters. The horse, sensing tension, pawed the ground, its eyes glowing silver in the lantern light. Elira stepped forward slightly, placing herself between the horse and the intruder. "This is not your concern," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Leave or you will regret it." The rival laughed, a low, cruel sound. "A servant dares speak to me." How amusing. He took a step closer, and the air seemed to chill around him. Shadows bent unnaturally, as if responding to his will. Valric's eyes narrowed. He felt the stirrings of anger, pride, and something more complicated, a protective need he could not ignore. Without a word, he stepped fully into the stable, towering over the rival, his presence radiating power and authority. "You will leave," Valric said, voice deep and commanding, echoing off the stone walls. "Or you will face consequences you cannot imagine." The rival's lips twisted into a snarl. "You think your power scares me. I have challenged centuries, and I will take what is mine." The horse whinnied loudly, muscles coiling, nostrils flaring. Elira placed a calming hand against its forehead, murmuring, "It's okay, stay calm." The creature's body relaxed slightly, yet the tension in its stance made it clear it was ready to defend her at a moment's notice. Valric stepped forward, closer to Elira, and lowered his voice. "Do not interfere further, this is mine to face." Elira met his gaze, sensing the intensity of his emotions. "I will not run," she said softly, "but I will not hide either. Not from him, not from you." Valric blinked, surprised by her courage. Few had ever dared speak to him in such a way. He felt a strange pull, pride, fear, and something that resembled trust. He had not expected to feel any of these in centuries. The rival lunged forward, shadows stretching from his cloak, reaching like dark fingers toward the horse. The horse reared, hooves striking the ground with earth-shaking force. Elira held onto its mane tightly, guiding its movements, whispering encouragement. To her amazement, the horse responded to her in ways it had never responded to anyone else. It moved with precision, keeping the rival at bay while remaining close to her. The shadows from the rival recoiled slightly, as if afraid of the bond between the human and the horse. Valric watched in silent awe. For centuries he had believed no one could influence the creature, and now a mere servant had done what he himself had failed to do, form a connection based not on fear but on trust and compassion. The rival staggered backward, frowning. "Impossible," he muttered. "How?" Elira stepped forward slightly, her hands raised as if to calm the shadows themselves. "It's not power you use that matters," she said gently, "but understanding." The rival hissed and vanished into the shadows, retreating for now. But the threat remained, a warning that the world outside the castle was watching, waiting for any misstep. The horse exhaled slowly, and Elira rested her forehead against its massive head. "We did it," she whispered softly, though her heart still raced. "We're safe for now." Valric approached slowly, his shadow stretching over her. He did not speak, but his eyes held a mixture of admiration and uncertainty. Elira glanced up at him. For the first time she saw not just a master, but a being trapped in centuries of solitude, longing for something he did not know how to name. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known," Valric said finally, his voice softer than before. "And that unsettles me." Elira smiled faintly, understanding more than she let on. "Then perhaps I am meant to unsettle you." Valric's lips twitched in the faintest shadow of a smile. He did not respond immediately, and for a long moment they stood together in silence, bound by the tension of the night, the horse between them, and the growing awareness of something neither of them fully understood. The castle itself seemed to hold its breath, the shadows curling in anticipation. Outside, the wind howled through the cliffs, carrying whispers of storms to come. The bond between Elira and the horse had shifted the balance of the castle, the vampire, and the world he inhabited. And somewhere deep in the corridors, the rival vampire lord plotted his return, waiting for the moment to strike and challenge this fragile connection. Elira's hand lingered on the horse's head, feeling the warmth and strength flowing from it. She sensed not just power, but trust, respect, and a kind of magic older than the castle itself. "I will not let anything happen to you," she whispered, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Valric watched her, feeling emotions he had not known in centuries: protectiveness, awe, and an ache of longing. He realized then that the servant had done more than tame his horse. She had touched something inside him that had long been buried. A light in the darkness, fragile but undeniable. The night stretched on, deep and silent, filled with the promise of challenges yet to come. And as Elira guided the horse back to its stall, she could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, a beginning that would test courage, loyalty, and the fragile threads of trust and love that had begun to form. The castle doors creaked in the distance, and Valric's shadow fell across the stable once more. He knew that the rival's threat was far from over. And in the depths of his immortal heart, he wondered if he could survive what was coming, not just for his own sake but for hers as well. And so, in the stillness of the moonlit stable, the bond between servant, horse, and vampire grew stronger. But beyond the walls of the castle, shadows stirred, and a storm of destiny began to gather, one that would challenge everything Elira and Valric had begun to build together. The wind howled across the cliffs surrounding the castle, carrying the scent of salt, earth, and something older, something that had waited in the shadows for centuries. Elira stood in the stable, her hands still resting on the massive black horse's head. The creature's muscles rippled under her touch, but it remained calm, as if it knew that the danger approaching was not just for it, but for them all. Valric appeared silently at the doorway, his dark cloak trailing behind him. His eyes, pale and sharp, swept over Elira and the horse. He was a figure of power and danger, but tonight there was something softer in his gaze, a vulnerability he had not shown in centuries. Elira felt it and her heart quickened. "You feel it, don't you?" Valric asked, his voice low and almost a whisper. "The shadows, they are gathering." Elira nodded. "I do, something is coming." From the cliffs above, a figure emerged, moving like a shadow itself. It was the rival vampire lord, cloaked in darkness, his eyes gleaming with cruel intent. Behind him, the wind seemed to twist, carrying whispers of curses long thought dormant. The night itself felt alive, anticipating the confrontation. Valric's jaw tightened. He has come to claim what he cannot have, and he will not leave without a fight. Elira felt the tension in the horse beneath her. Its eyes shone silver in the moonlight, reflecting not just the approaching danger, but also the trust and bond it shared with her. She whispered softly, "We are ready, together." Valric stepped forward, his presence commanding and immense. The air seemed to bend around him, carrying the weight of centuries, yet he did not stand between Elira and the intruder. Instead, he allowed her to remain with the horse, acknowledging without words that she had a part to play in the coming battle. The rival vampire lord raised a hand, and shadows leapt from the ground, twisting into shapes of jagged darkness aimed at the stable. The horse snorted and reared, its hooves striking the floor with force that shook the stone walls. Elira pressed her hands against its forehead, whispering encouragement, her voice carrying calm and confidence into the chaos. To Valric's astonishment, the horse responded instantly. The shadows recoiled as if repelled by a force older than time itself. Elira's connection with the creature was more than trust. It was a bond that could influence magic, shape power, and withstand darkness. "You've changed him," Valric said quietly, more to himself than to her. "No one has ever done this before." Elira looked up at him. "We have changed each other," she said gently. "He listens because we both believe in kindness, in understanding." The rival snarled, realizing that his attack was failing. He advanced, his presence growing heavier, more threatening. The air around him crackled, filled with shadows that writhed like living things. But the horse remained steadfast, its head held high, eyes locked on the intruder. Valric stepped forward, drawing on his centuries of power. He did not attack immediately. Instead, he focused, sending a ripple of energy through the castle and stable, a warning to the rival that he was not merely a creature of flesh, but a being of centuries of strength and magic. "You will leave," Valric said, voice echoing like thunder. "Or you will face consequences that even your dark heart cannot withstand." The rival lunged, shadows flaring around him. The horse bolted forward, Elira holding tight, guiding it with gentle hands. Together they moved as one, a single force of light, trust, and courage against the darkness. Valric followed, his form a shadowy storm of power, intercepting the rival mid-step. The clash of their energy shook the stable, sending lanterns swinging and throwing shadows into frantic motion. But despite the violence, Valric did not strike to kill. He struck to contain, to protect. He wanted Elira safe, the horse safe, and the bond they shared intact. Elira whispered to the horse, feeling the magic of the connection pulse between them. "Stay with me, we can do this together." The horse lowered its massive head, nuzzling her as if affirming its loyalty. Its hooves struck the ground, creating waves of energy that pushed the rival back, forcing him to stagger. The rival growled, frustrated and enraged. How can a mortal control this? How can this beast resist me?" Elira's voice rang clear in the chaos. "It's not control. It's trust, it's love, and that is stronger than your darkness." For the first time, Valric saw Elira not as a servant but as an equal, someone whose courage and heart could rival centuries of darkness. He felt a stirring within himself, an acknowledgement that he had allowed someone to touch him, to soften him, and perhaps, for the first time, to save him. The rival made one final attempt, gathering all the shadows into a storm of blackness aimed at the horse and Elira. But Elira, trusting the bond, held her hands against the horse's forehead and closed her eyes. A wave of warmth and light radiated from her, filling the stable. The horse's silver eyes glowed brighter, and together they pushed the shadows back. Valric watched in awe. The power that erupted from their connection was something he had never seen before, a combination of human courage, mystical trust, and centuries of the vampire's own shadow bound in harmony. The rival screamed, his darkness dissolving under the force, and vanished into the night, leaving only whispers and the rustling of wind. The stable was quiet again. Lanterns swayed gently, casting soft light on the walls. The horse lowered its massive body to the ground, breathing heavily but calm. Elira rested her forehead against its mane, exhausted but triumphant. Valric approached slowly, his presence no longer intimidating but protective. He knelt beside her, placing a hand lightly on the horse's neck. "You have done what no one else could. You have tamed him, not with force but with understanding. And in doing so, you have tamed a part of me as well." Elira looked up at him, her eyes reflecting both relief and concern. "You're still dangerous," she said softly, "but I don't fear you, not anymore." Valric's eyes softened, the coldness that had defined him for centuries melting slightly in the warmth of her gaze. "And you are remarkable, courageous, kind, and unlike anyone I have ever known. You have changed me, Elira, in ways I did not believe possible." The horse shifted, nuzzling her gently as if agreeing with every word. Elira smiled faintly, her hand resting on its massive head. She realized that the bond she shared with the creature, and now with Valric, was not just about survival or obedience. It was about connection, understanding, and the power of compassion in a world of darkness. Valric stood, his eyes scanning the horizon. The rival was gone, but he knew the shadows would never fully disappear. There would always be threats, always challenges. But for the first time in centuries, he felt something he had thought impossible: hope. "You have changed more than him," Valric said quietly, looking at Elira. "You have changed me, and perhaps you have even saved me." Elira's heart fluttered. "Then perhaps we save each other," she replied. A silence settled over the stable, filled with the calm after the storm. The moonlight poured through the windows, casting silver light on the horse's sleek coat, making it appear like a living shadow illuminated by magic. Elira rested against the creature, feeling its strength and warmth flow into her, a reassurance that whatever came next, they would face it together. Valric stepped closer, lowering his gaze to meet hers. "There is still much to learn," he said softly, "about trust, about power, about each other. But tonight, we have begun something that cannot be undone." Elira nodded. She felt the weight of history, magic, and destiny around them. But she also felt the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her and the steady presence of Valric beside her. For the first time, she believed that darkness could be met with courage, solitude with companionship, and fear with understanding. The castle seemed to sigh in relief, the stones themselves acknowledging the shift in balance. Outside, the wind calmed, carrying with it the faint scent of distant storms and new beginnings. The shadows that had lingered for centuries had been pushed back, not destroyed, but reminded that light and gentleness could hold power stronger than fear. Elira rose slowly, brushing her hands along the horse's mane one last time. "We did it," she whispered. "We survived together." Valric's voice followed her, gentle yet filled with certainty. "Yes, together." The horse whinnied softly, a sound that resonated deep in their chests, echoing the promise of loyalty, trust, and the bonds that had formed under the moonlit night. Elira knew that this night would be remembered for centuries, not as a tale of conquest or fear, but as the night a servant, a vampire, and a giant horse forged a bond that could not be broken, even by shadows or time. And so, beneath the silver glow of the moon, the castle of stone and shadow became a place of new beginnings. A place where courage met darkness, where understanding tamed power, and where hearts, even those thought long lost to solitude, found connection once more. The night was still but full of possibility. And for Elira, Valric, and the untamable horse, the story had only just begun, an epic of trust, redemption, and the quiet, unstoppable force of compassion.